Picture this. You're standing in line at the grocery store.
Oh, we have all been there.
Right. And the person in front of you has like a cart just entirely overflowing with items.
Naturally.
And they've just decided, to everyone's collective horror, to pay with exact change.
Oh, the absolute worst.
It's agonizing. Or, maybe you're on a train platform, it's raining slightly, and the digital sign just flashes that your ride is delayed by like 7 minutes.
Yeah.
I want you to think about what your hands are doing in that exact moment. Or more specifically, I want you to think about that feeling in your chest.
That kind of low-level panic.
Exactly. Because if you are anything like almost any human being alive today, you already have your smartphone in your hand before you've even consciously registered the train delay.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally automatic.
There is this immediate, almost phantom itch.
Oh.
It's a physical sensation of panic if you pat your pocket and the phone isn't there. You feel this desperate, overwhelming drive to pull out a screen, to scroll, to check a feed, to do literally anything other than just stand there and exist in the empty time.
Yeah, I mean, it has become an entirely reflexive motor loop for most of us.
The motor loop, yeah.
We have essentially pathologized the feeling of having nothing to do. We treat boredom, this natural, ambient state of human existence, like a trivial nuisance.
Or like a disease, right?
Exactly, like some sort of acute cognitive disease that we need to immediately medicate with, a heavy dose of external stimulation. We view a blank moment as a broken moment.
And that brings us to the core paradox we're unpacking today. What if we have this entirely dangerously backwards?
Which the science strongly suggests we do.
Right. What if that uncomfortable, itchy feeling of having quote-unquote nothing to do isn't a bug in the human operating system? What if it is actually a biological imperative?
It's a huge question.
What if the state of being bored, that exact moment, you are staring blankly at the back of someone's head in the grocery line, is actually the most metabolically expensive, deeply necessary state our brains can possibly enter?
Yeah, the science actually backs that up completely. It's a profound paradigm shift in how we understand human cognition.
Welcome to Audio Notebook, by the way. I'm so excited about this one.
Me too. Because when you think your brain is powered down, when you feel like your mind is just idling and you aren't doing anything productive, neurologically speaking, your brain is actually working harder.
Wait, harder?
Oh, much harder. It's firing more rapidly and consuming more energy than when you are intensely focused on a highly complex external task.
Which absolutely shatters everything I thought I knew about how attention works. So today we are going on a journey into the hidden, microscopic architecture of the idle mind.
Yes, the server farm in your head.
We are going to explore the startling neurological cost of never, ever allowing ourselves to be bored. And we're going to look at the hard science of how to reclaim those quiet moments that literally, biologically, build our identities.
To really grasp the magnitude of what the brain is doing when it's doing nothing, we have to rewind a bit.
Okay, let's go back.
We have to look at how completely the scientific community misunderstood the resting brain for the vast majority of the 20th century. Neuroscience had this massive, glaring blind spot.
I love a good story of science getting something completely wrong before getting it right. So how were we looking at the brain before? What was the baseline assumption?
Well, for decades, the prevailing model was that the brain was purely a reactive organ.
Reactive meaning what exactly?
Think of it like a light bulb or an appliance plugged into a wall. The logic dictated that if you were doing a specific attention-demanding task, like, say, solving a complex math equation or translating a language, the brain was switched on.
Right, it was drawing power to do the work.
Exactly. And if you were just sitting in a comfortable chair staring at a blank wall with no external stimuli, the brain was essentially switched off.
Like a machine just sitting there, completely inert, waiting for someone to push a button.
Yeah, it was assumed to be in a state of sheer dormancy. And the fascinating part is that this assumption was actually accidentally reinforced by the very technology that was supposed to revolutionize our understanding of the brain.
You mean brain scans?
Right. When researchers first started using early neuroimaging techniques, things like positron emission tomography or PE scans, and later functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, they were looking strictly for task-evoked activity.
Those are the classic studies you always read about, right? Like, this part of the brain lights up when you think about your mother.
Or this part lights up when you taste chocolate. Exactly. But here's the critical methodological error they made.
Okay.
fMRI machines measure the blood oxygen level dependent signal, or the BOLD signal. Essentially, it tracks where the oxygen-rich blood is rushing to in the brain.
Because active neurons need oxygen to fire.
Exactly. So when subjects were resting in the scanner between these complex tasks, the machines still picked up on massive, spontaneous, low-frequency fluctuations in that BOLD signal.
Meaning blood and oxygen were still moving around.
Huge amounts of it in these highly specific, massive waves.
Wait, so the brain was clearly still doing something huge,
Yeah.
even between the tasks.
It was. But because the researchers were so hyper-focused on mapping the specific tasks, they looked at this massive background activity and assumed it was just physiological artifacts.
Artifacts, like glitches.
Yeah, they literally termed it neural noise. They assumed it was just interference from the patient's breathing or the rhythmic pumping of their heartbeat or just random, meaningless static in the neurological wiring.
So what did they do with the data? Did they just ignore it?
Oh, it's worse than that. They mathematically subtracted it.
Oh my.
They threw out the data entirely to isolate the task-based activation. They essentially erased the brain's most fundamental background process from their models because they thought it was just static on the radio dial.
That is wild. They were throwing out the most important piece of the puzzle because it didn't fit the light bulb analogy.
Right.
So when did someone finally realize that this static was actually a broadcast?
It took until a massive breakthrough at the turn of the millennium. In 2001, a neurologist named Marcus Rachel and his team at Washington University in St. Louis noticed an anomaly.
What kind of anomaly?
Across thousands of scans, they saw something they simply couldn't ignore anymore. Rachel saw that specific interconnected regions of the cortex consistently did the exact opposite of what the light bulb model predicted.
The opposite.
Yeah. When subjects were given a really hard, externally directed task, the metabolic activity in these specific regions didn't just stay quiet, it actively plummeted. It suppressed itself.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Doing a hard task like a math problem made certain specific parts of the brain actively power down.
Yes, and the corollary was even more surprising. These exact same regions became highly synchronized, lighting up in perfect rhythmic tandem when the subject was asked to do absolutely nothing.
You're kidding?
No. When the researcher said, just close your eyes and let your mind wander, or just stare blankly at this cross on the screen, this massive network roared to life.
It's the exact inverse of what we would expect.
Precisely. So Rachel went deeper. He analyzed something called the oxygen extraction fraction.
What is that? The oxygen extraction fraction?
It's the ratio of the oxygen consumed by the brain tissue to the oxygen delivered to it by the blood. By calculating this, he definitively proved that this baseline resting state was not a dormant state at all.
It wasn't random noise.
And it wasn't a physiological artifact. It was highly organized, incredibly intentional, and incredibly energy intensive. He coined the term for it right then and there.
Which is?
The default mode of brain function.
The default mode network. The DMN. And here's where the physics of it just blow my mind.
Go on.
When you look at the sheer energy consumption, the light bulb analogy completely falls apart. If I understand the basic biology, the human brain uses roughly 20% of the body's entire daily energy budget.
That's a standard metric, yes. It is an incredibly hungry organ.
Even though it only makes up, what, about 2% of our body weight?
Exactly.
But the vast majority of that 20% energy budget isn't going toward the active tasks. It's not going toward doing the crossword puzzle or driving the car or writing an email.
No, it's not.
The vast majority of that energy is dedicated solely to sustaining this background default mode network.
It's staggering when you really think about it.
It makes me think of a smartphone battery. You know how you look at your battery usage at the end of the day and you think you drained it by playing a video game or something?
Right, but then you look at the settings.
Yeah. You look at the settings and see that background activity where the operating system itself actually drained 80% of the battery.
That is a remarkably accurate way to conceptualize it.
The brain isn't a light bulb that turns on and off. It's more like a massive humming server farm.
I love that, a humming server farm.
And even when no one is actively sitting at the terminal typing on the keyboard, those giant servers are running massive diagnostic checks. They're backing up terabytes of data, running complex predictive simulations entirely behind the scenes.
That perfectly captures the biological reality. The idle brain is performing massive calculations.
So if we accept that the brain is a humming server farm during our quietest moments, we have to ask, what exactly is this server farm made of?
Because it isn't just an abstract concept, it is a physical, anatomical structure.
Right, let's map it out, because from what I gather, the DMN isn't just one localized lump of tissue right behind our foreheads.
Not at all. It's a massive, coordinated system spanning the whole brain. It's a large-scale, bilateral, and highly symmetrical network. It spans multiple, distinct regions across the cortex and deep into subcortical areas.
And because these regions are physically distant from one another, they must have to communicate at lightning speed to stay synchronized, right?
Exactly. They achieve this because they are wired together by massive white matter tracks.
White matter tracks. Can you explain what those are, mechanically speaking?
Think of white matter tracks as the physical, biological fiber optic cables of the brain.
Okay, fiber optics.
Right. Gray matter is where the processing happens, the computers themselves. White matter is the insulated wiring connecting them. The two critical superhighways for the default mode network are the cingulum bundle and the fornix.
The cingulum bundle and the fornix.
Yes. These massive bundles of nerve fibers wire together the frontal, parietal, and medial temporal lobes, allowing them to fire in perfect orchestrated rhythm.
Okay, so we have the fiber optic cables and the superhighways. What are the actual processing centers? What are the major cities on this map that the highways connect?
Neuroscientists generally divide the DMN into three core anatomical subsystems, each with a highly specialized function.
Let's go through them.
First, you have the midline core hubs. This subsystem includes regions like the posterior cingulate cortex, the PCC, the precuneus, the anterior medial prefrontal cortex, or AMPFC, and the angular gyrus.
The midline core hubs. So PCC, precuneus, AMPFC, angular gyrus. If we stick to our server farm analogy, what is their specific job?
They are the ultimate executives, the CEO of the network, if you will. Their primary job is coordinating the entire network and handling what we call self-referential thought.
Meaning how we think about ourselves.
Exactly. When you are assessing your own traits, when you are feeling a specific emotion and evaluating what that emotion means to you personally, that is the midline core hubs at work.
Oh, wow.
They integrate bottom-up sensory attention with your memory to construct your ongoing sense of me. They constantly monitor what's happening internally and decide what actually matters to your personal narrative.
Got it. So the midline core is central command, monitoring the self. What is the second subsystem?
Next is the dorsal medial subsystem. Anatomically, this includes the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, the DMPFC, the temporoparietal junction, which researchers usually just call the TPJ.
The DATFC and the TPJ.
That's the lateral temporal cortex and the temporal pole.
Okay, the dorsal medial subsystem. What's its specialty in the quiet brain?
This subsystem is the empathy engine. It is heavily focused on social cognition. It runs a process that psychologists call theory of mind or mentalizing.
Theory of mind, meaning our ability to understand that other people have minds of their own.
Precisely. It is the brain's innate ability to reflect on the beliefs, intentions, desires, and emotional states of other people.
So when I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling and replaying an argument I had with a coworker.
Trying to figure out why they reacted the way they did or what they might have been feeling?
Yes.
That is the subsystem firing on all cylinders. It processes abstract social concepts.
That is completely fascinating to me. Even when we are entirely alone, isolated in an empty room, our brain has a massive, dedicated anatomical subsystem whose only job is to run social simulations.
We are biologically wired to never truly be alone.
Wow. Okay, what about the third subsystem?
The third is the medial temporal subsystem. This one is deeply anchored in the architecture of human memory.
Okay, what are the parts here?
It includes the hippocampal formation, or HF plus HEA, the parahippocampal cortex, PHC, the retrosplenial cortex, RSC, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, and the posterior inferior parietal lobule, PIPL.
Okay, that is a lot of cortexes. HF plus PHC, RSC, VMPFC, PIPL. What does this memory subsystem actually do when we are bored?
Its primary focus is autobiographical memory retrieval, spatial navigation, and episodic memory consolidation.
So it's basically the archivist.
Think of it as the brain's archivist and its time machine. It is the part of the DMN that takes the raw data of your past experiences, organizes them, and allows you to mentally project yourself out of the present moment.
Okay, so we have these three massive subsystems humming away in the background. The midline core coordinating our sense of self, the dorsal medial handling social dynamics and empathy, and the medial temporal acting as a time machine for our memories.
That's a perfect summary.
But clearly, I can't be running all those massive internal simulations while I'm trying to safely merge onto a busy highway. or write a complex report for work.
No, definitely not.
So how does the brain know when to switch? How does it toggle from the active, outward-focused state to this massive internal DMN state?
That is a crucial question because the brain cannot sustain both simultaneously at full power. It requires a dynamic toggle switch. The DMN constantly interacts with other large-scale brain networks.
Right.
When you need to focus on that highway merge, a completely different network called the Executive Control Network, or ECN, takes over. It governs goal-directed, externally focused tasks.
So the ECN is the doing network, and the DMN is the being network.
Exactly. But the actual physical switch, the mechanism that violently flips the track between the DMN and the ECN, is a third network.
Oh, there's a third one.
Yes, called the Salience Network, or SN.
The Salience Network. I've always conceptualized this one in a very specific way.
Yeah.
It's anchored by the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, right?
That's anatomically correct, yes.
I always picture the Salience Network as like a neurobiological bouncer standing outside a club, or maybe an air traffic controller.
A bouncer is an excellent way to visualize it. How does the bouncer operate in your mind?
Well, imagine the DMN is having this huge, loud internal party. You're sitting on a train, daydreaming, you're time traveling back to high school with your medial temporal subsystem, you're running empathy simulations about your friends with your dorsal medial subsystem.
You are completely detached from your physical surroundings.
Right. Then suddenly, someone drops a heavy suitcase right next to you, or someone calls your name. That sudden external stimulus is a shiny object or a potential threat.
Yep.
So the Salience Network is the bouncer who immediately detects that external stimulus, steps into the club, abruptly shuts down the DMN party, and activates the Executive Control Network to deal with reality.
Hey, stop daydreaming. You need to deal with the suitcase.
Exactly.
That is flawlessly accurate. The Salience Network's entire biological purpose is to detect relevance. It scans the environment for anything highly salient, a threat, a reward, a sudden noise.
And when it finds one?
When it detects one, it immediately downregulates the default mode network, suppressing that internal party, and pulls you out of the resting state into active environmental engagement.
So, applying this back to our grocery store line, the bouncer steps aside because there are no immediate threats or tasks. We get bored, the DMN takes over. What is this massive network actually calculating?
Well,
You mentioned the medial temporal subsystem acts as a time machine. I wanted to dig into this time travel concept because it's so wild to me that our brains are essentially running complex sci-fi calculations when we are just staring out a window on a rainy day.
it truly is remarkable. When you are bored, meaning your cognitive system is completely unoccupied by external demands, the DMN takes dominance and facilitates what clinical researchers call spontaneous thought, or internal mentation.
And mental time travel is part of that.
It is at the very core of this. When you are bored, your mind rarely stays tethered to the strict, immediate present moment. It naturally oscillates.
Oscillates how?
The hippocampus and the parahippocampal cortex dive into the archives and pull up fragments of past episodic memories. During idle time, these recent memories are reactivated, processed, and slowly integrated into long-term storage.
Okay, that's memory consolidation, right?
Yes. This is a process called consolidation, and it is absolutely essential for human learning. But here's the critical part. The DMN doesn't just passively play back these memories like a DVD player.
What does it do?
It actively recombines them.
It remixes the memories.
Exactly. It takes the raw, disconnected data points of your past experiences and uses them as building blocks to construct entirely hypothetical future scenarios. It allows you to anticipate upcoming challenges, formulate long-term goals, and evaluate potential risks without any immediate real-world consequences.
Which, if we look at this from an evolutionary perspective, must have been a profound survival tool. I mean, imagine early human hunter-gatherers out on the savannah.
Absolutely.
The ones who could use their idle time sitting around the fire to recall the spatial memory of a previous predator attack and then use that memory to mentally simulate a future hunt.
Figuring out escape routes before the tiger ever appeared.
Yes, they had a massive evolutionary advantage. Boredom was essentially the critical preparatory phase for survival.
You've hit on the exact evolutionary rationale for why the DMN is so metabolically expensive. It was worth the calorie expenditure because running those risk-free simulations in a virtual reality environment built from your own memories kept our ancestors alive.
That makes so much sense.
But in the modern world, the DMN isn't just calculating survival logistics against predators. It is doing something even more profound. It is building who we actually are.
Right. You mentioned earlier that the midline core hub handles self-referential thought. How does boredom actually build our identity?
Beyond just sorting memory, the DMN is widely considered by neuroscientists to be the biological foundation of the self.
The foundation of the self.
Yes. Through spontaneous mind wandering, the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex continuously evaluate your personal traits, your shifting emotional states, and your autobiographical facts.
Okay.
The DMN is not a passive recorder of your life. It is an active, opinionated narrator. It engages in a psychological process that researchers literally term selfing.
Selfing, using the self as an active verb. What are the actual mechanics of selfing?
It involves three main cognitive actions that run in the background. First is selective memory retrieval.
Meaning we don't remember everything perfectly.
Right, your brain doesn't remember everything equally. The DMN actively emphasizes certain experiences while downplaying or completely ignoring others to fit a cohesive narrative of who you think you are.
That's fascinating. What's the second action?
Second is causal linking. It creates logical narrative connections between events that might otherwise just be random, chaotic coincidences.
Oh, I do this all the time. For example, saying, I failed that test because I am naturally anxious, rather than, I failed that test because it was a hard test. It links a random event to an identity trait.
Exactly. You construct a cause that reinforces your identity. And the third action is temporal bridging.
Temporal bridging, connecting time.
Yes. The DMN connects the past version of you to the present version of you and projects toward the future version of you. It takes the incredibly chaotic, disparate, and often contradictory events of your daily life and weaves them together into a cohesive, enduring internal narrative.
It maintains the illusion of a continuous you.
Precisely.
This is where it starts to get a little scary to think about the modern world. If the idle time provided by boredom is strictly required for this selfing narrative building process, what happens if we never let ourselves be bored?
It's a huge problem.
It's deeply terrifying to realize that without that quiet time, our actual sense of self, our internal narrative might literally begin to fragment, simply because the DMN never gets the time to run its maintenance cycle.
It is a profound clinical concern. Without the quiet reflection afforded by boredom, the self-illusion loses its coherence. People begin to feel disconnected from their own lives.
No.
But the DMN's work doesn't stop at the self. It also builds our connection to everyone else. Boredom physically primes the brain for complex moral reasoning and social cognition.
This goes back to the dorsal medial subsystem, the empathy engine. How does being bored make us more empathetic?
Humans are fundamentally biologically social creatures. Even in extreme physical isolation, when you are profoundly bored, the DMN ensures that your social cognition remains active and sharp.
How so?
The temporoparietal junction, the TPJ, and the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex light up when we process moral dilemmas. They allow us to infer the perspectives of others.
Right, theory of mind.
Yes. And through something called embodied simulation, which heavily utilizes the brain's mirror neuron system, you can actively conceptualize the suffering or joy of your peers.
Wait, what is embodied simulation? How do mirror neurons play into this?
Mirror neurons are a class of neurons that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that same action.
So if I watch you pick up a cup, the same neurons fire in my brain as if I were picking it up.
Exactly. During idle time, the DMN leverages these networks to simulate social interactions. You are literally using boredom to practice feeling what others feel in a simulated neurological environment.
That is beautiful.
You are continuously maintaining your social fabric and your capacity for deep empathy, even when you are completely alone in a room.
Okay, let me get this straight and synthesize what we've covered so far. The default mode network is doing all of this vital, beautiful, incredibly complex work. It's consolidating memories, it's planning for our survival, it is actively building the narrative of our identity, and it is practicing empathy so we can be functional social creatures.
Right.
It sounds unbelievably productive. So why does being bored often feel so agonizing? Why does staring out that train window often fill us with this uncomfortable, itchy sense of dread?
That brings us to the crucible of meaning-making.
The crucible, I like that.
Because the DMN is doing such abstract, high-level work, it inevitably brushes up against profound existential realities.
Okay.
When sensory deprivation forces the mind to turn inward, when the bouncer locks the doors to the outside world, you aren't just daydreaming about what to have for dinner. The lack of immediate distraction forces you to confront massive, abstract, and often intimidating concepts.
The 2 a.m. questions.
Exactly.
What does my life actually mean?
Yeah.
Am I on the right path? Are my relationships genuinely fulfilling? Or am I just going through the motions?
Precisely. And because these questions are inherently vast, deeply personal, and incredibly difficult to resolve, DMN activation during unstructured boredom almost always induces a baseline level of mild psychological discomfort.
It triggers existential dread.
Yes. But here is the critical physiological truth. Facing that specific uncomfortable dread is a strict neurobiological prerequisite for psychological maturation.
Okay, I really want to walk through the neurobiology of this meaning-making process. Because we all know that feeling of dread, but how do we actually get from feeling existential dread on a Sunday afternoon to actually finding meaning in our lives?
Meaning-making transcends simple associative learning. It isn't just memorizing a fact.
Right.
It requires the brain to pull away from immediate sensory inputs and synthesize broad, complex patterns from a lifetime of messy events. Functional neuroimaging reveals a highly nuanced, multi-stage toggle between our brain networks when we do this.
A toggle.
Yes. We see this most clearly when individuals are trying to process highly stressful life events and achieve what clinical psychologists call stress-related growth, or SRG.
So we experience a trauma or a major stressor, like a bad breakup or a career failure, and we need to make sense of it. What exactly is happening in the brain's networks?
First, unstructured boredom allows the DMN to surface the existential problem.
Okay.
The memory of the stressor and the associated pain is brought to the forefront of your consciousness. The DMN puts the problem on the desk.
And that causes the initial wave of discomfort.
Right. But to actually synthesize a resolution, to actively make meaning of the trauma and achieve stress-related growth, the brain must then execute a complex maneuver. It must temporarily decrease DMN connectivity.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand this coggle. It has to turn the DMN down to solve the problem that the DMN just brought up.
Exactly. The executive networks must engage.
Oh, the ECN steps in.
Yes. Researchers observing this process have noted diminished functional connectivity specifically between the posterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex during active meaning-making tasks.
Fascinating.
In fact, there is a significant documented negative correlation between constant DMN activation and coping flexibility.
Coping flexibility being our ability to adapt to the trauma.
Yes. Coping flexibility is a primary indicator of successful stress-related growth. If your DMN is just blazing at full power constantly, you are just staring at the trauma, feeling the pain, but never processing it.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this toggle, because it feels incredibly important.
It is.
The DMN needs the idle time of boredom to dig up the deep, uncomfortable questions or the unresolved trauma. It puts the messy files on the desk.
Yes.
But if the DMN just stays hyperactive, we just stare at the messy desk and feel the dread.
Yeah.
We actually need the executive control network to step in, quiet the DMN down slightly, sit at a desk, and actively work through the problem to find a meaningful resolution.
That is an exceptionally accurate summary. It is a highly dynamic toggling mechanism. Unstructured boredom is required to surface the issue. Executive control is required to resolve it. They must work in tandem.
Which brings us to what we can call the doom loop of meaning.
The doom loop.
Let me try to synthesize this for the listener based on what you just said. If we constantly distract ourselves, if we pull out the smartphone, the exact second we feel that initial twinge of boredom in the grocery line, we entirely circumvent the initial surfacing of those existential inquiries.
Yes.
The DMN never gets the quiet time to put the problem on the desk. Wait. So by avoiding the tiny, mild discomfort of being bored for 2 minutes, we are accidentally guaranteeing ourselves a massive, permanent sense of meaninglessness.
Yes, unfortunately.
We are literally short-circuiting the meaning-making machine because we never even let step 1 happen.
That is the exact clinical reality we are facing. Without the periodic mild discomfort of confronting one's life trajectory, you lose your sense of coherence.
That is so dark.
The meaning is never established because the question was never allowed to be asked. This leaves individuals with a persistent, ambient sense of hollowness. It makes them highly susceptible to clinical depression, generalized anxiety, and a pervasive feeling of uselessness. Boredom is the psychological friction required to spark the search for significance. Eradicating boredom entirely eradicates that spark.
That is chilling. We're trading long-term existential peace for short-term distraction from minor friction.
Exactly.
But to prove exactly how far humans will go to avoid this exact friction, we have to talk about what is easily one of the most jaw-dropping, darkly hilarious psychology experiments of the modern era.
Oh, you are referring to the 2014 study by Wilson and Gilbert.
I am. The Harvard Electric Shock Study. When I was reading the background for this, my jaw was literally on the floor. I couldn't believe the numbers. Can you meticulously detail the setup for us? Because the methodology is just brilliant.
Certainly. This was a landmark psychological study published in the highly prestigious journal Science by psychologists Timothy Wilson of the University of Virginia and Daniel Gilbert of Harvard University.
Two heavyweights.
Very much so. The paper was titled, rather simply, Just Think: The Challenges of the Disengaged Mind. It was a massive undertaking.
How many studies were in it?
It comprised 11 distinct sequential studies, all attempting to answer one fundamental question. Do people voluntarily choose to engage in default mode processing? And do they actually find the experience of an unoccupied mind enjoyable?
And spoiler alert for the listener, they absolutely do not. So how do they actually test this in a lab?
Well, in the initial phases of the study, they took hundreds of undergraduate participants, placed them in a sparsely furnished laboratory room, and gave them a very simple instruction.
Which was?
Spend between 6 and 15 minutes entertaining themselves with their thoughts. No external distractions were permitted whatsoever. No smartphones, no books, no music, no screens, not even a pen and paper.
Just a human being, a chair, and their default mode network.
Exactly. But to truly explore the extremes of experiential avoidance, to see exactly how much humans hate that friction you mentioned, study number 10 introduced a radical physical variable.
That's shocking.
Yes. Before the isolation period began, the participants were exposed to various positive and negative stimuli to establish a baseline of preferences. One of the negative stimuli was a mildly painful electric shock.
Okay, so establishing that the shock actually hurts.
Yes. The participants were asked to rate the pleasantness of these stimuli. Crucially, they were then asked a hypothetical economic question.
What was the question?
Would you pay money out of a hypothetical $5 endowment to guarantee that you would never have to experience that painful electric shock again?
Which is a very logical human response. Yes, I will happily pay you to not electrocute me.
Precisely. So having firmly established on the record that the shock was aversive enough that participants would pay financial capital to avoid it, the researchers moved to the 15-minute isolation phase.
Right.
The participants were left completely alone in the bare room with nothing to do. However, there was a mechanism in the room, a button that would allow them to administer that exact same painful electric shock to themselves if they chose to do so.
Let me just pause here to let this sink in for the listener because the setup is so diabolical. You are put in a room for a maximum of 15 minutes. It's not a week. It's the length of a short commute.
Right.
You have already explicitly stated on the record that you would pay money to avoid being shocked again, and that you are left alone with your thoughts and a button. What were the results? What did the participants do?
The qualitative results were stark, but expected. The vast majority of participants reported afterward that it was incredibly difficult to concentrate.
I bet.
They said their minds wandered uncontrollably to uncomfortable, anxious places, and they rated the overall experience of just thinking as highly unenjoyable, scoring it an average of 5 on a 9-point scale.
But the behavioral results?
But the behavioral results were staggering. A massive proportion of the exact same participants who had previously stated they would pay money to avoid the shock opted to voluntarily shock themselves rather than endure 15 minutes of uninterrupted thought.
It is absolute sheer disbelief. What were the exact statistics on who actually pushed the button?
67% of the men and 25% of the women administered at least one electric shock to themselves during that idle 15-minute period.
Oh my God.
They demonstrated a clear, measurable, and highly irrational preference for negative physical stimulation and literal pain over the psychological discomfort of cognitive idleness.
Okay, 67% of men. I have to laugh just a little bit, the sheer absurdity of human nature. Why do you think there was such a massive disparity between the men and the women in this study?
It's an interesting question.
Is the male threshold for boredom just that much lower? Is it just a biological imperative of, I'm bored, let's see what happens if I electrocute myself?
It's a fascinating behavioral divergence. Psychologists attribute it likely to a combination of sensation-seeking trait differences, which statistically skew higher in males, and perhaps differing cultural levels of socialization regarding the ability to sit quietly with emotional discomfort.
That makes sense.
But the core takeaway transcends the gender divide entirely. A shockingly high percentage of humans across the board prefer literal physical pain over facing the mirror of their own default mode network.
Now, I know this study came out around 2014, which was right during the height of the replication crisis in psychology, where a lot of classic famous studies were being aggressively debunked because their sample sizes were too small or the statistics were flawed. Given how crazy these results sound, did this study actually hold up to scientific scrutiny?
It faced intense, immediate scrutiny precisely because the results were so damning. However, independent replication attempts, most notably a massive effort by the Social Sciences Replication Project, successfully reproduced the core findings.
Wow, so it held up.
It did. Participants vastly preferred engaging in mundane, even aversive external activities over internal thought. Gilbert and Wilson rigorously defended their statistical models against critics, proving that high-fidelity replications confirmed their original conclusions.
So what's the ultimate consensus here?
The robust, undeniable scientific consensus that emerged is this: the untutored human mind deeply detests being alone with itself. Steering thoughts internally requires immense cognitive effort, and without the scaffolding of an external task, the mind defaults to uncomfortable rumination. That experiential avoidance is deep-seated and universal.
Which brings us directly to the reality of the digital age. Historically, as you said earlier, we couldn't always escape this dread. We had to endure the train rides, the waiting rooms, the time lying in bed before sleep.
We had no choice but to sit with the discomfort and let the DMN do its heavy lifting.
But now, we've invented the absolute perfect, frictionless, pocket-sized escape hatch.
The smartphone.
How is the smartphone actually changing the physical and functional architecture of our brains? Because it isn't just a psychological habit, right? It's changing the wiring.
To understand the digital hijack, we have to look at a concept called neurological mimicry. Smartphones are not just another distraction like a magazine or a crossword puzzle. They are uniquely disruptive because social media algorithms exogenously mimic exactly what the DMN evolved to process internally.
Break that down for me. What do you mean by exogenously mimic?
Well, remember that the dorsal medial subsystem of the DMN evolved to process social hierarchies, personal identity cues, and novel environmental simulations.
Or the empathy engine, right?
Exactly. It does this endogenously, meaning it generates these simulations from within using your memories. Social media provides an endless, algorithmically curated stream of externalized social and self-referential stimuli. You are viewing social hierarchies, reading opinions, and comparing identities.
Right.
But because this data is coming from the outside exogenously, your brain must activate the dorsal attention network, or DAN, and the executive control network, or ECN, to process the visual and textual information on the screen.
Oh, I see.
Consequently, the DMN is kept permanently suppressed.
So we are getting the social and identity data, but we aren't doing the internal work to process it. It's like having someone else chew our food for us.
That's a very vivid image.
It technically provides the raw calories, but it completely atrophies our own biological muscles because we aren't doing the mechanical breakdown ourselves.
That is an exceptionally accurate biological metaphor.
Uh-huh.
By outsourcing the processing to the algorithm, you enter what neuroscientists call a pseudo-resting state.
Pseudo-resting state.
Yes, you are not fully engaged in deep, demanding cognitive work. Doom scrolling on a couch isn't the same as writing a novel or solving physics equations, but you are also not fully at rest in the default mode.
So what's happening to the toggle switch?
The toggle switch we discussed earlier, the salience network, becomes thoroughly exhausted. It is constantly bombarded by microstimulations, notification alerts, visual shifts, and dopamine-driven reward anticipation.
You just get stuck.
You become trapped in a liminal space of continuous partial attention. The brain is neither resting nor working. It is simply hovering in a state of high alert paralysis.
And this isn't just a psychological feeling of brain fog or tiredness, right? We can actually measure the physical, anatomical harm this causes in neuroimaging studies.
We can measure it very clearly.
What are the major physiological changes we see in heavy smartphone users?
Resting state fMRI and structural neuroimaging reveal profound, measurable alterations in the brains of heavy media multitaskers. The first major change is altered functional connectivity.
Which means what?
In problematic smartphone users, we see chronic hypervigilance. There is dramatically enhanced connectivity within the salience network itself and between the salience network and the DMN.
What does that mean for the person experiencing it?
It means the brain is locked in a state of chronic alertness for external rewards.
The bouncer is constantly looking for trouble.
Exactly. The bouncer is frantically looking out the door, making it almost impossible to smoothly disengage and enter a true restorative resting state. You are perpetually braced for an interruption.
You're always subconsciously waiting for the ping. Okay, what's the second measurable change?
Reduced executive coupling. We observe severely decreased functional connectivity between the salience network and the central executive network, or CEN.
And when those disconnect?
When these two networks disconnect, the functional impact on the individual is severe. It manifests as diminished self-regulatory control, extremely high distractibility, and deep impulsivity.
See, you literally can't stop yourself.
You lose the neurological ability to deliberately steer your own attention. You become a slave to whatever stimulus is loudest.
And the third change is the one I find the most alarming, because we aren't just talking about electrical signals anymore. We're talking about actual structural changes to the brain tissue.
Yes. Researchers use a technique called voxel-based morphometry, or VDM.
Voxel-based morphometry, what does that do?
This measures the actual volume and density of gray matter brain tissue. And VBM scans show that heavy media multitaskers suffer from structural gray matter atrophy. They possess significantly smaller gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC.
And the ACC is responsible for what?
It is a region critical for complex cognitive control, socio-emotional regulation, and high-level decision-making. By outsourcing our identity cues and social processing to algorithms, the physical tissue responsible for our own self-regulation literally shrinks from disuse.
That is terrifying. The brain is adapting to the tool by discarding its own hardware. I don't need this self-regulation muscle anymore because the phone tells me how to feel.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening structurally.
And the craziest part is, we don't even have to be actively looking at the screen for it to mess with our cognition. Explain the brain drain effect, because this blew my mind.
The brain drain effect refers to the highly replicated phenomenon where merely having a smartphone in your physical presence, even if it is completely powered off, placed face down on the desk in front of you, and entirely silent, significantly reduces your available cognitive capacity.
Even if it's off and face down, how's that possible?
Because your brain knows it is there. The salience network knows the escape hatch is within arm's reach. So your brain is actively exhausting limited executive resources and working memory, just trying to suppress the subconscious habitual urge to reach out and check the device. It requires active metabolic energy to ignore the phone. That energy is stolen from whatever task you were trying to focus on.
So we are chronically distracted, our gray matter is physically shrinking, and we are existentially understimulated because the DMN never runs.
It's a perfect storm.
And this isn't just about losing focus at work or feeling a bit foggy. This chronic disruption pushes the brain into clinical pathology. What actually happens when the DMN gets stuck or functionally breaks down?
The DMN requires a healthy, rhythmic cycling, toggling smoothly on and off to maintain psychological equilibrium. When that cycling becomes dysregulated, it serves as a primary neurobiological driver for severe psychiatric disorders. Let's examine major depressive disorder, or MDD, as a primary example.
How does clinical depression alter the actual mechanics of the DMN?
In a healthy neurotypical brain, the DMN deactivates smoothly and rapidly when you need to focus on an external task. In patients suffering from MDD, neuroimaging reveals severe hyperconnectivity and hyperactivity within the DMN.
It refuses to shut off.
Exactly. Specifically, we see this hyperactivation in the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, or SGAC, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus.
And because the DMN is the seat of self-referential thought, this hyperactivation does what to the patient?
It traps the person in a vicious state of maladaptive self-focus. Instead of engaging in constructive meaning-making or future planning, the depressed brain loops continuously through repetitive, deeply negative autobiographical memories and highly pessimistic future simulations.
It's just spinning its wheels in the mud.
This mechanical, biological failure to suppress the DMN is the exact neurobiological basis of clinical rumination. The brain is literally stuck in the default mode, unable to disengage even when the person desperately wants to focus on the external world to escape their own thoughts.
What about anxiety disorders? We all know anxiety involves a lot of overthinking. Is it a similar mechanism of being trapped in the DMN?
It is a related mechanism, but the flavor of the pathology is entirely different. Remember the medial temporal subsystem's capacity for mental time travel, which evolved to help us anticipate future threats like predators.
Right.
In chronically anxious individuals, there is an altered pathological functional connectivity between the medial prefrontal cortex, which is within the DMN, and the amygdala, which is the brain's primary fear and threat detection center.
So the mental time machine gets wired directly to the panic button.
Precisely. It results in a pathological overdrive of threat simulation. The mind continuously spins out catastrophic what-if scenarios, projecting the self into endless disastrous futures.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The individual cannot disengage the default mode to focus on the objective physical safety of their present moment. The DMN transforms from a network of restorative, quiet reflection into a runaway engine of hyperarousal.
Now, I really want to spend some time on ADHD because the relationship between ADHD and boredom is incredibly fraught.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyone who has ADHD or knows someone with it knows that boredom is absolute torture for them. And understanding the DMN explains so much of this mechanically. What is the default mode interference hypothesis?
The default mode interference hypothesis provides a striking mechanical explanation for ADHD symptoms. A primary neurobiological marker of both adult and pediatric ADHD is the profound inability to suppress DMN activity during externally demanding tasks.
Meaning the toggle switch is broken.
Exactly. When a neurotypical person performs a boring, repetitive task, the salience network suppresses the DMN, it quiets down, and the task-positive network takes over to execute the chore. In ADHD brains, this toggle switch is fundamentally glitchy.
And this toggle switch is mediated by dopamine, right?
Yes, specifically tonic dopamine levels in the brain. Because those levels are dysregulated, the DMN remains highly active during the task, continuously injecting spontaneous mind-wandering, internal noise, and daydreams into their stream of consciousness.
It just talks over the task.
It utterly destroys task focus because the internal party is still raging while they are trying to do their taxes. But it's worse than just being distracted. Individuals with ADHD suffer deeply from a state called understimulation fatigue.
Understimulation fatigue. Break that down for me.
Because their baseline tonic dopamine levels are abnormally low, engaging in a boring task feels almost physically painful.
Painful?
Yes. The brain is burning massive amounts of glucose, attempting to force the executive networks to focus on an uninteresting task, while simultaneously having to fight off the intrusive thoughts generated by an unsuppressed DMN. It is a neurological war zone. It is deeply exhausting.
I really want to pause and reflect on this because understanding this mechanism demands so much empathy.
It really does.
So often we look at someone with ADHD who is doom scrolling on their phone instead of doing their homework or finishing a report, and society labels that behavior as a character flaw. We call it laziness or lack of discipline or just a bad habit.
That's the common stigma.
But when you understand the neurobiology, doom scrolling isn't a moral failure at all. It is a desperate, exhausting act of neurochemical self-medication.
Absolutely.
They are seeking high dopamine external distractions from the screen just to quiet the unbearable, agonizing roar of an unsuppressed DMN. They are just trying to find a functional, quiet baseline that the rest of us take for granted.
That is an incredibly compassionate and biologically accurate framing. For the ADHD brain, boredom is not a trivial nuisance. It is an intolerable state of neurochemical crisis, and they are fiercely compelled to seek those external inputs just to turn down the internal noise.
Okay, so we've looked at the severe consequences of DMN suppression and dysregulation in individual clinical brains. But what happens when you take this exact mechanism, the suppression of idle time, and apply it to an entire generation of developing minds all at once?
That's where it scales up.
Let's talk about the 2012 inflection point.
This is where the neurobiological impacts we've been discussing scale into a massive population-level epidemiological crisis. Psychologists and generational researchers, most notably figures like Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt, have extensively documented a sudden, severe, and cross-cultural inflection point in youth mental health that began precisely around the year 2012.
Set the scene for us. What was the mental health landscape like for teenagers before 2012?
Prior to 2012, rates of adolescent depression, generalized anxiety, and self-harm were relatively stable across the Western world. In fact, by some metrics, psychological well-being and risk behaviors were actually improving. Teenagers were drinking less, getting into fewer accidents.
But then 2012 happens.
Right. 2012 is the exact historical period when smartphone ownership crossed the 50% threshold in Western nations. Social media moved from the desktop computer in the family room to the pocket, accessible 24/7.
And what happened to the data?
Exactly. Concurrent with that saturation, mental health outcomes absolutely plummeted.
The data on this is just staggering when you look at the charts. Walk us through the numbers from the major cohort studies.
A major longitudinal cohort study tracking 6,595 U.S. adolescents demonstrated a clear dose-response relationship.
Meaning, the more you use it, the worse it gets.
Exactly. Youth who spent more than 3 hours per day on social media platforms faced double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, including severe clinical depression and anxiety, compared to low users.
Double the risk.
And Twenji's deep dive into the epidemiological data highlighted an unprecedented spike. Major depressive episodes among teenagers increased by a staggering 50% between 2011 and 2015 alone.
In just 4 years.
Yes. And these sharp increases in depression, profound loneliness, and self-harm hospitalization rates are markedly more pronounced among adolescent girls and young women.
A 50% spike in clinical depression in just 4 years. That is an epidemiological earthquake. You don't see numbers jump like that unless a new pathogen is introduced.
It's completely unprecedented.
So how do Haidt and Twenge explain the actual mechanics of this? How do they prove it's the phones causing it and not just, the economy or climate change anxiety?
They systematically rule out other factors and categorize the evidence into 2 distinct buckets. First is the product safety question, which asks if these digital platforms are inherently harmful or toxic by design. Second is the historical trends question, which asks if these platforms definitively caused the population-level crisis.
And what do they find?
The sheer volume of longitudinal studies confirms that heavy digital media acts as a primary vector for harm. But crucially, it's not just through direct exposure to toxic content like cyberbullying or unrealistic body image algorithms.
It's not just the bad content.
No. The primary, most damaging mechanism is displacement.
Displacement theory. What exactly are the phones displacing from a child's day?
Smartphones, by commanding constant attention, directly displace the fundamental biological pillars of human development. They displace the hours previously spent on restorative sleep. They displace in-person, synchronous social interactions. They displace physical activity.
Right.
And crucially for our topic, they displace unstructured, unsupervised, idle play. As Haidt articulates, we rapidly transition from a traditional play-based childhood where kids roamed and managed their own boredom to a phone-based childhood.
Let me synthesize this displacement theory with everything we've learned so far about the default mode network.
Please do.
By displacing unstructured play and quiet, idle time, an entire generation was stripped of the very quiet time required for the DMN to do its job.
Exactly.
We took away the boredom they desperately needed to run the selfing process and build a resilient identity. We took away the time they needed to simulate future goals and practice empathy through embodied simulation.
It's a developmental tragedy.
So we are left with a generation that is hyper-connected digitally, but entirely existentially adrift, because the biological meaning-making machinery of their brains was systematically stunted during their most critical developmental window.
You have connected the neurological to the sociological perfectly. That is the tragic biological consequence of a developing brain that is systematically starved of its natural resting state. Without boredom, the foundational architecture of the self is compromised.
We have painted a very, very dark picture over the last hour of what happens when we lose boredom.
It is grim.
But I want to pivot because it isn't all doom and gloom. I want to look at the incredible reward we get if we can actually endure the friction. Let's explore how boredom serves as a massive catalyst for human creativity.
Yes, the silver lining.
Because while colloquially we associate boredom with stagnation and dullness, cognitive neuroscience identifies it as a critical, highly active precursor to creativity.
Specifically, it is the driver of divergent thinking, novel problem solving, and associative flexibility.
Okay, what does that mean?
Human creativity relies on a dance between 2 distinct cognitive phases. Generation, which relies on divergent thinking, and evaluation, which relies on convergent thinking.
Okay, generation versus evaluation. Divergent versus convergent. How does boredom actually trigger the generation phase?
Well, generating genuinely novel ideas requires the brain to temporarily break free from established semantic constraints and rigid linear logic.
Right.
When you become bored, the lack of external stimulation initiates what neurobiologists call a seeking state, or exploratory behavior. The brain wants stimulation, so it has to make its own.
So it starts looking inward.
Yes.
Here.
The DMN activates intensely to retrieve a wide, seemingly random array of memories, abstract concepts, and latent knowledge. Simultaneously, the executive control network, which normally enforces strict logic and filters out absurd or irrelevant thoughts, is transiently suppressed.
I love this concept. I'd like to think of the executive control network as an overbearing, highly critical, strict editor. And the default mode network is a chaotic, brilliant, messy artist.
That's a great analogy.
When you are focused on a task, the editor is fully in charge, keeping everything neat and logical. But boredom essentially locks the strict editor out of the room. It lets the chaotic artist pull out all the latent memories and abstract concepts and just start throwing paint at the walls to see what sticks.
Exactly. It forms remote, bizarre associations that the editor would have instantly vetoed for being illogical.
That is a phenomenal metaphor, and it tracks perfectly with the neurobiology. That temporary relaxation of top-down cognitive control locking the editor out is the absolute hallmark of human insight. The DMN artist is granted the unfettered freedom to forge novel semantic associations across distant regions of the brain.
And there is brilliant empirical evidence for this, most notably a highly cited 2014 study published in the Creativity Research Journal by psychologists Sandy Mann and Rebecca Cadman.
I read about the Mann and Cadman study. The methodology they used to test this is so brilliantly, hilariously simple. Tell us how they set it up.
They split participants into experimental and control groups to formally test the boredom creativity hypothesis. To induce boredom in a highly controlled way, one experimental group was tasked with manually copying phone numbers out of a physical telephone directory onto a piece of paper for an extended period.
Pure torture.
Yes. We categorize this as active boredom. They are doing a task, but it requires zero cognitive engagement. Another group was tasked merely with reading the telephone directory aloud. They didn't even have to write. We call this passive boredom.
And the control group.
The control group bypassed the boredom induction entirely and went straight to the testing phase.
Reading a phone book aloud,
Yeah.
it literally does not get more boring than that. So how do they measure their creativity afterwards to see if the seeking state worked?
Immediately following the boredom induction, all participants were subjected to standardized divergent thinking exercises. They used the classic alternate uses task.
Alternate uses, like, what can I do with a brick?
Exactly. This requires the subject to generate as many original, non-standard, and creative uses for a mundane object like a plastic cup or a brick as possible within a strict time limit.
And the results? Did the incredibly bored people invent better uses for the plastic cups?
The results were definitive. They consistently demonstrated that individuals who had undergone the boring activities vastly outperformed the control group in creative output. They generated a significantly higher volume of original ideas.
Wow.
But the truly fascinating nuance was the difference between the active boredom group and the passive boredom group.
The writers versus the readers.
Yes. The individuals engaged in the passive reading task produced the absolute highest levels of creative originality, significantly outperforming even the writing group.
The passive readers won. The ones who just read the phone book aloud were the most creative. Why did they beat the writers?
Returning to your metaphor, the researchers concluded that the passive reading task locked the editor further away. It allowed for more unfiltered mind wandering and daydreaming than the active writing task. Writing, even mindlessly copying numbers, requires at least a baseline level of motor control and executive attention to guide the pen.
Right.
Reading a phone book requires almost zero executive function. It granted the DMN artist maximum freedom to roam the brain and form remote, bizarre associations.
So if you are stuck on a problem at work, or you want a brilliant creative idea, don't try to actively force it by staring at a whiteboard and brainstorming. Just sit back and read a phone book, or stare at the ceiling. Let the artist throw the paint.
Essentially, yes.
Now, there is a scientific nuance here about the type of boredom, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier the difference between under-challenge and over-challenge.
Yes, that is a vital distinction in educational psychology and cognitive science. Boredom enhances creativity primarily in situations of under-challenge, where your cognitive resources are fully available, rested, but completely untapped by your current environment. This is entirely distinct from over-challenge boredom, which stems from cognitive overload, intense frustration, and mental exhaustion.
Like trying to read a textbook in a language you don't understand.
Exactly. If a task is impossibly hard, you might disengage, give up, and tell someone you feel bored. But neurologically, your brain is depleted. It is not in a seeking state, it is in a recovery state.
Got it.
But the broad scientific consensus firmly holds. Without the idle space of under-challenged boredom to let the DMN roam, the brain remains locked in convergent reactionary loops, which profoundly stifles human innovation.
So if boredom is this unequivocally vital for our biological identity, our psychological sanity, and our creative brilliance, how do we get it back?
That's the challenge.
We live in a world that is fundamentally algorithmically designed to steal every idle second from us.
Yeah.
We have to treat boredom tolerance like a muscle that is completely atrophied while we've been sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
How do we start lifting weights again?
We begin by completely reframing our relationship with the feeling. We must view boredom tolerance not as a transient mood that happens to us, but as a highly trainable psychological skill.
A trainable skill.
Yes. It is clinically defined as the cognitive and emotional capacity to endure the discomfort of an unoccupied mind without immediately seeking exogenous neurochemical relief. And psychologists can actually measure your baseline capacity for this using validated psychometric scales.
I know there are a few of these scales used in clinical settings.
Yes, the primary tool is the boredom proneness.
Let's say I take the SBPS and I score very high, meaning I am highly prone to boredom, I get bored easily, and I'm very intolerant of sitting with the feeling. What does that score statistically predict for the trajectory of my life?
Unfortunately, the longitudinal data is clear. High trait boredom proneness is a highly reliable, statistically significant predictor of severe deficits in self-control and executive functioning.
Because they can't handle the existential surfacing.
Precisely. Because these individuals cannot tolerate the demon's existential surfacing during low stimulation, they aggressively resort to maladaptive coping mechanisms to silence it.
What kind of coping mechanisms?
High scores strongly correlate with substance use disorders, problematic smartphone and internet addiction, binge drinking, pathological gambling, aggressive and risky behaviors, and significantly elevated scores for clinical depression and anxiety.
It's a tragic, vicious cycle. The less you can tolerate the internal noise, the more destructive your external escape hatches become. So for people trapped in that cycle, what are the actual therapeutic interventions? How do clinical psychologists rebuild this atrophy tolerance in patients?
Psychologists deploy several highly structured, evidence-based methodologies. The first line of defense is often cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
How does CBT work for boredom?
In this context, CBT is utilized to target the negative thought patterns and catastrophic appraisals associated with idle time.
Catastrophic appraisals, you mean like feeling that if I'm not actively being productive or entertained for 10 minutes, my entire life is falling apart?
Exactly, or the belief that the uncomfortable thoughts surfaced by the DMN are inherently dangerous and must be avoided at all costs. CBT helps patients identify the specific, irrational cognitive triggers that make boredom feel intolerable.
Reframing it.
Yes, it teaches them to logically reinterpret idle time, not as an agonizing void, but as a neutral, profoundly productive biological state.
Okay, what's the second intervention?
The second major intervention is mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. This approach directly trains the brain to observe feelings of restlessness and DMN activation without judgment.
Just sitting with it.
Right. By practicing sitting quietly in a room with the physical discomfort rather than fleeing to a screen, individuals gradually build deep distress tolerance. They neurologically regulate that hyperactive connection between the DMN and the amygdala panic button.
You just sit there and realize, okay, I'm bored, my brain is throwing weird thoughts at me, but I am physically safe. And the third intervention.
Behavioral activation, or BA. This was originally designed as a treatment for severe clinical depression, but it is highly effective for modern behavioral addictions. It focuses on forcing individuals to systematically engage in deeply fulfilling, value-aligned, non-digital activities, things that inherently require sustained attention and physical presence, like woodworking, gardening, or face-to-face volunteering.
Doing real things.
Right. By filling the schedule with high-value analog activities, it organically reduces the frequency of pathological screen-seeking boredom.
Before we get to this specific, actionable daily protocols the listener can use to build this muscle, I do want to touch on the open scientific questions. Because the science of the DMN is still evolving rapidly, right?
Very rapidly.
We know the DMN is vital for creativity and identity, but we also know that when it's hyperactive, it causes depressive rumination. Where is the actual line? Where's the exact threshold between healthy meaning-making and toxic rumination?
That is currently one of the primary areas of ongoing debate and intense research in neurobiology. DMN activation drives our most brilliant creative insight, but hyperactivity in the exact same network drives our darkest depressive loops.
So we don't know the threshold yet.
No. Neuroscientists are currently using advanced imaging to map the specific frequency channels in subnetwork connectivity patterns that differentiate productive, wandering, spontaneous thought from destructive, rigid looping. We don't have the exact threshold mapped yet.
And there's also an ongoing debate about the nature of the screens themselves, right?
Yes. As digital architecture becomes completely unavoidable in modern life, researchers are wrestling with a crucial nuance. Whether certain forms of high-quality digital engagement can coexist with a healthy, resting state brain.
Right. Like, is reading a book on a Kindle as bad as doom-scrolling TikTok?
Exactly. Is it the glowing screen, the rapid context switching, and the medium itself that inherently degrades the DMN? Or is the degradation strictly a function of the toxic, hyper-stimulating content consumed and the displacement of offline activities?
It's a huge question.
Can you read a dense novel on a tablet and still maintain DMN integrity? That remains a fiercely debated question in the literature.
Regardless of how that specific academic debate settles, the immediate prescriptive advice for our daily lives is abundantly clear. We have to intentionally reintroduce friction and unstructured boredom into our routines.
They do.
We have 4 evidence-based protocols that our listeners can apply immediately to start rebuilding this tolerance. Let's walk through them. Number 1, microdosing boredom.
Microdosing boredom is exactly what it sounds like. It involves intentionally leaving your devices behind during low-stakes transitional periods of your day.
Start small.
Yes, you don't start by going on a month-long silent retreat. You start small with 15-minute bursts of engineered friction. This means commuting to work in silence without the radio or a podcast, or exercising at the gym without your headphones.
Just letting it run.
You deliberately allow the DMN temporary, safe spaces to surface novel ideas and consolidate your daily memories.
Just feeling the air on your skin while you walk the dog. Okay, protocol number 2, temporal and spatial boundaries.
This involves implementing strict no-device policies during critical social and physiological windows. For example, categorically banning phones at the dinner table.
Which helps with empathy.
Yes. This ensures sustained social cognition, activating the DMN's dorsal medial subsystem so you can practice empathy and mentalizing with your family. Additionally, establishing a strict temporal boundaries, such as no devices after 7:00 p.m., and keeping phones entirely out of the bedroom protects your sleep architecture and lets the mind decompress naturally without exogenous stimulation.
Protocol 3 is the intense one. Digital cleanses and withdrawal.
Undergoing prolonged, multi-day periods of digital abstinence. It is vital to prepare individuals for the fact that this initially provokes severe dopamine withdrawal. It is characterized by an intense, agitated physical craving that mimics substance addiction withdrawals.
I read a subjective description from a patient going through this withdrawal phase, and it haunts me. They describe the feeling as having children screaming in your head.
It's very apt.
That is how chaotic and loud the brain feels when it is suddenly denied its digital pacifier.
It is intensely, viscerally uncomfortable. The bouncer is screaming because he doesn't know what to do, but pushing through that specific acute discomfort is what eventually resets the brain's reward pathways.
And when you through it.
Once the withdrawal subsides, the DMN resumes its deep existential processing, which ultimately leads to a profound, lasting sense of psychological relief and cognitive clarity.
And finally, protocol 4, reevaluating emergencies.
This is a fundamental cognitive reframing step. You must recognize that continuous updates from social media, group chats, or 24-hour global news cycles do not constitute genuine personal emergencies.
They really don't.
A highly effective tactical approach is utilizing device settings to whitelist only vital contacts, such as your immediate family members or boss. This strips away the persistent, anxious excuse that you must remain connected to the digital void at all times, just in case.
It gives the brain permission to clock out.
It finally grants your brain the biological permission it needs to fully disengage.
So with all of that incredible science in mind, I want to issue a direct, immediate challenge to you, the listener.
Do it.
Try microdosing boredom today. The very next time you are standing in a line at the grocery store, or waiting for a pot of water to boil, or waiting for a delayed train, not reach into your pockets.
Just let the DMN turn on.
Just stand there. Observe the physical panic, that phantom itch in your body as it demands a screen. Sit with the friction. Recognize that that uncomfortable feeling isn't a flaw in your operating system. It is your brain, your massive server farm, begging for the idle time it desperately needs to default back to itself.
It is a vital, necessary exercise in reclaiming your cognitive autonomy.
What an absolute roller coaster of a journey we've been on today. We started by mapping the massive, hidden anatomical superhighways of the default mode network.
We covered a lot of ground.
We looked at the terrifying clinical reality of the meaning-making doom loop, the sheer painful avoidance demonstrated in the Harvard electric shock study, and the tragic generational toll of displacing unstructured time for an entire cohort of kids. But we also saw the clear path back, how enduring the silence, letting the artist out of the room, unlocks our most profound creative insights and our deepest empathetic connections.
We spend our entire lives terrified of missing out on what is happening in the world, constantly refreshing our screens and seeking the next hit of data. But if the intricate biology of the default mode network teaches us anything, it's that by refusing to be bored, by constantly running from the silence, the only thing we are truly missing out on is ourselves.
What a perfectly provocative, profound thought to end on. If you never let your brain idle, you never get the chance to meet yourself. Thank you so much for joining us on this exhaustive, fascinating session of Audio Notebook. We hope you have a wonderfully, brilliantly boring rest of your day.